10 historical villains who weren't actually as bad as their reputations. Number 10. Max Baer. Max Baer was a professional boxer who was a world heavyweight champion in the mid-1930s, but he's most remembered for causing the deaths of 2 other boxers. In 1930, Baer fought Frankie Campbell. Campbell took a series of punches to the jaw while up against the ropes and collapsed. He was taken to hospital and pronounced dead the following day as a result of brain damage. Another fighter, Ernie Schaff, also died from meningitis 5 months after a bout with Baer, with many accusing Baer of being responsible. As a result of these incidents, Baer has often been portrayed as a heartless killer in the ring. The movie Cinderella Man in particular depicted him as callous and unconcerned about killing fellow fighters. This view of Baer is totally unjustified. Campbell's death affected him deeply. He visited his opponent in the hospital, where Campbell's wife forgave him, remarking, "It could have been you." After Campbell's death, Baer supported his family financially. Number 9. Xerxes. The movie 300 famously depicted Xerxes as some kind of evil, superhuman god king, but in fact, there's been a long tradition of denigrating the Persian king and his empire as uniquely cruel or despotic. It makes for good fiction, but it's nonsense. The Achaemenid, or First Persian Empire, was the largest and most advanced state in the world at the time. It comprised many smaller nations, which were not generally oppressed, but were allowed to keep their own rulers, languages, and customs. As for Xerxes himself, there's no indication he was crazy, evil, or bloodthirsty, at least no more so than any other ancient ruler. He inherited the war with Greece from his father, who had vowed to take revenge on Greece for supporting rebellions within the Persian Empire. Xerxes defeated an alliance of Greek city-states at Thermopylae and later captured and razed the city of Athens. His campaign failed because he was scared of getting trapped in Europe, so he withdrew most of his army. He returned home, where he focused on building projects until he was overthrown and murdered by his own bodyguards. The real Xerxes was a somewhat incompetent but pretty standard ancient ruler. Number 8. Antonio Salieri. Salieri was an Italian composer who lived between 1750 and 1825. He was made famous, or infamous, in the movie Amadeus, where he's depicted as a jealous schemer working every angle to undermine Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Both men were prominent in Vienna in the same era and were perceived to be rivals for public acclaim, royal patronage, and jobs. Indeed, they were rivals, and some of Mozart's letters complained that Salieri was pulling strings to keep him down. After Mozart's untimely death, rumors began to circulate that Salieri had actually poisoned him. Salieri's music fell out of fashion in the late 19th century, whereas Mozart has remained, well, a classic. As such, it's been easy to paint Salieri as a second-rate composer who used dirty tricks to keep Mozart from eclipsing him, and maybe even murdered his young challenger. But there's no evidence supporting that at all. In fact, while Salieri and Mozart were competitors of sorts, they also supported and praised each other. And when Mozart died young, Salieri saw to his son's musical education. Number 7. Marie Antoinette. The luckless Queen of France, wife of Louis XVI, who became the symbol of all that was wrong with France during the Revolution, and was beheaded by her people in 1793. It also hardly needs to be said that she never recommended starving French peasants eat cake if they couldn't afford bread. The mountain of slanders against Marie Antoinette reaches into space at this point. We really only have time to address a few. One of the incidents that did the most damage to her reputation was the affair of the diamond necklace. A con artist pretending to be Marie Antoinette purchased a $15 million necklace in her name. When the jewelers came to collect the money, Marie told them she had no idea what they were talking about, which she didn't. But all people heard was that the Queen tried to buy a $15 million necklace, which she hadn't. She'd previously refused to buy it twice because it was a waste of money. The criticism that Marie Antoinette was lavish in general is slightly ludicrous. Of course she was lavish. She was the Queen of France. Showering patronage on artists and craftsmen was part of her job. She would have been criticized if she hadn't been lavish. Marie has also often been dismissed as an airhead, but her personal library suggests she was curious and well-read. To the extent she was uneducated, that was a product of her upbringing. She wasn't trained to be a queen because she was never meant to be one. The only reason she ended up marrying Louis was because so many of her older sisters died young. That brings us to another reason Marie was despised that was totally out of her control. She was Austrian, and the French hated the Austrians. One of her nicknames was Autrichienne, which means Austrian woman, but is also a pun on the word chien, meaning bitch. French revolutionaries produced lurid pamphlets accusing and often depicting Marie Antoinette performing unspeakable acts. These were gobbled up by a public that already hated her and contributed to her dehumanization. Whatever Marie Antoinette was, she was not responsible for the suffering of the French people. She was really just an ill-prepared girl who was forced to marry the King of France and was basically miserable the entire time. Number 6. Nero. That's right, we're going to defend Nero. Let's tackle some myths. 1. Nero was responsible for the Great Fire of Rome and fiddled while the city burned. Nope, Nero wasn't in the city when the fire started, but he raced back to help manage the response. He provided relief for victims out of his own purse, let them stay in his palaces, and rebuilt their homes. 2. Nero murdered his wife, Poppaea. This is highly unlikely. Nero was insanely distraught after her death, burning a year's supply of incense at her funeral and attempting to embalm her. He even married a young man who was said to resemble her. 3. Nero murdered his mother. This is probably true, but his mother, Agrippina, wasn't some sweet old lady knitting by the fireside. She was the power behind his throne. She chose his advisors, assassinated powerful people she didn't like, and went so far as to mint coins with her face on them, an honor normally reserved for emperors. Nero probably killed his mother because she was a political rival, something other emperors did all the time. Now, we're not saying Nero was a nice guy. He was extravagant, attention-seeking, and susceptible to flattery. He seized land made available by the fire to build a huge and unnecessary new palace for himself. But at the end of the day, the proof that Nero wasn't as ineffective as ancient sources insist is his undeniable popularity with ordinary Romans. It's telling that 2 of his immediate successors, Otho and Vitellius, tried desperately to imitate him. Urban legends that Nero never died or that he would return from death to lead the Romans again persisted for centuries after his death. Number 5. Bloody Queen Mary. Mary I was Queen of England from 1553 to 1558. The daughter of King Henry VIII, she succeeded her brother Edward VI as the first Queen of England to rule entirely in her own right. Henry VIII had broken away from the Catholic Church because the Pope refused to grant him a divorce from Mary's mother, Catherine of Aragon. Instead, Henry founded the Protestant Church of England, which did allow him to divorce or behead his wives as circumstances required. As a result of all this, Henry's marriage to Catherine was declared null and void, making Mary illegitimate. Understandably, Mary did not accept this and remained a devout Catholic. When Mary took power, she set about trying to restore her officially Protestant country to what she saw as the true faith. To that end, she eventually had 280 Protestants burned at the stake, which is not great, and it earned her the nickname Bloody Mary for all time. But was Mary really any bloodier than any other ruler of the 1500s? The answer is no. Estimates of the number of people executed under Henry VIII, for example, range from 50 to 70,000. As much as we are disgusted by the idea of burning people for their faith, that idea wasn't considered crazy in the 16th century. At that time, people viewed heresy as a form of treason. Protestants and Catholics were both perfectly willing to kill each other. Mary's half-sister and successor, the celebrated Elizabeth I, executed heretics too. Mary's real problem, historically speaking, is that she only reigned for 5 years and died young. Elizabeth restored England to Protestantism, and history is written by the victors. Number 4. John Tyler. John Tyler was the 10th President of the United States. Tyler is mostly remembered, if he's remembered at all, for defecting to the Confederacy during the Civil War. And let's be clear, betraying the country you once led is pretty shocking. Tyler was also a huge supporter of slavery. Not a great dude, and definitely someone who deserves to be condemned. But here's the thing, he's typically rated as one of the very worst presidents, but he actually did a surprisingly good job in office despite facing enormous challenges. When President William Henry Harrison died 31 days into his term, Tyler, as vice president, took the job for himself. This had never happened before, and it was extremely controversial. Half of Tyler's cabinet resigned, and he was kicked out of his own party. Isolated, with no allies, you would expect Tyler to achieve nothing. But he actually achieved quite a bit. He concluded a treaty with Great Britain which settled the Canadian border, improved relations, and helped combat the transatlantic slave trade. Most importantly, Tyler was instrumental in bringing Texas into the United States, which he did on his own initiative and despite the obstruction of Congress. Number 3. Neville Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain was British Prime Minister from 1937 to 1940. His name is virtually synonymous with appeasement, the idea that Adolf Hitler could be dissuaded from starting a war if some of his demands for territorial expansion were met. Obviously, that plan could have gone better. Chamberlain is most heavily criticized for signing the 1938 Munich Pact, which handed the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia over to Hitler. As a result, he's largely been dismissed as a naive man who was duped by Hitler and refused to confront him before it was too late. There's some truth in that, but it ignores a lot of context and also the work Chamberlain did to prepare for war. Chamberlain's attempts to conciliate Hitler were largely popular at the time. Britain had lost almost 900,000 men in World War I. No one wanted a sequel. Chamberlain also knew in no uncertain terms that Britain was not ready for war in 1938. His generals told him so. He had little choice but to play for time. To his credit, he used that time to rebuild Britain's weak military. In particular, he more than doubled the Royal Air Force's fighter squadrons and invested in a radar warning system that would prove crucial to his country's defense. Without Chamberlain's intervention, the Royal Air Force may have lost the Battle of Britain. Number 2. Warren G. Harding. Harding served as the 29th President of the United States from 1921 until his untimely death in 1923. His reputation for corruption is legendary. More recently, his image wasn't helped by a John Oliver segment about how he called his manhood Jerry and liked to bang his friend's daughter in a White House closet. Harding's Secretary of the Interior, Albert Hall, became the first cabinet member to go to prison when he was caught taking bribes from oil companies. This is known to history as the Teapot Dome scandal, and it was considered the worst disgrace in American history before Watergate. But there's never been much interest in the good Harding did. Unlike his predecessor, Woodrow Wilson, Harding was genuinely outraged by racism and fought hard for an anti-lynching bill. He also worked to desegregate the federal government, insisting that members of his cabinet hire African Americans. Harding had a great record on civil rights in general. Wilson had imprisoned about 600 people for opposing America's involvement in World War I. Harding pardoned or commuted almost all of them. He wasn't a great president, but Warren Harding doesn't deserve his almost entirely negative reputation. Number 1. Empress Alexandra. Alexandra was the last Empress of Russia, the consort of the ill-fated Tsar Nicholas II. She's infamous for her association with Rasputin, which led in part to the downfall of the Romanov dynasty. Rasputin styled himself as a holy healer. In reality, he was a ravenous con man and sex offender who was despised by the church. Alexandra's only son, Alexei, the heir to the Russian throne, suffered from hemophilia. For whatever reason, hypnotism, malign influence, or just luck, Rasputin had an apparent ability to bring the prince back from the brink of death. For this reason, Alexandra was unswervingly loyal to Rasputin, despite the fact that his presence scandalized Russian society. Alexandra dismissed government officials who refused to tolerate the mad monk. Rumors swirled that he was in secret control of the government and that Alexandra was his lover. Neither was true, but that hardly mattered. It's easy to say that Alexandra should have recognized the danger and turned on Rasputin, but consider things from her perspective. Her son was extremely ill, in excruciating pain, and she genuinely believed only one man could save him. In her eyes, anyone speaking against Rasputin was speaking in favor of letting her son die in agony. Moreover, as queen, Alexandra had a responsibility to produce an heir and to protect him at all costs. She couldn't publicly disclose her son's illness, so most people had no idea what was really going on. All this was made worse by the fact that Alexandra was unpopular to begin with. She had been a German princess, and Russia was at war with Germany, so she was unfairly smeared as a German spy, which she wasn't. So there you have it, 10 historical villains who don't quite deserve their reputations. What do you think? Did we miss someone? Is someone on the list who shouldn't be there? Let us know in the comments below. And if you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to History Snob for more content. Thank you for watching.